Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a genuinely brilliant psychological breakdown of exactly why you might feel inexplicably alienated or just completely exhausted in your relationships. If you've ever walked into a room and felt a sudden chill or sensed a really deep resentment from someone you know for a fact you've never wronged, then you are in exactly the right place. We are going to explore Carl Jung's profound insights into a social dynamic that has likely been draining your energy for years, and we're going to do it step by step so we can finally make sense of it all.
All right, let's just dive right into this gripping mystery by starting at the psychological crime scene you've probably been trapped inside for years. You have spent your entire life searching for the crime you committed. You will never find it. So why is that? Well, it's because you are obsessed with fairness. When a colleague suddenly shifts their tone or a family member treats you with this cold distance that seemingly has no origin, your very first reflex actually isn't anger, it's investigation. You immediately open a case file on yourself.
Part 1. The endless internal investigation.
You treat their hostility like it's some sort of math problem, right? Assuming that if you just tweak your behavior, you'll balance the equation. You notice the tension, so you run an internal audit in real time. You start wondering, was I too direct? Was I judgmental? So you shrink, you soften your tone, you apologize for things you can't even name, and you watch their face to see if the tension drops. But it doesn't. You make yourself smaller, and yet the people who resented you when you were large resent you equally when you are small.
But you know how many actual crimes you committed? Zero. Literally zero. Because, well, this autopsy was never going to produce a verdict. There was never a body to begin with. Your ego assumes causality, meaning that if you're receiving hostility, you must have generated it somehow. But Jung understood something your ego resists. These deep human reactions absolutely do not follow the clean logic of action and consequence. The apologies you offered were deposited into an account that didn't even belong to you. You didn't break this dynamic, which means you can't fix it.
Part 2. The biological crime.
So if you didn't do anything wrong, what's going on? Well, we need to look at the one biological trait you possess that just seems to draw this inexplicable punishment. Because if they aren't reacting to what you did, we have to figure out what exactly is triggering them. And it all comes down to the simple fact that you do not perform. Carl Jung described this type of perception, and what's crucial to understand here is that it isn't a performance, it is literally how your nervous system is wired to process reality. You didn't ask for this, it isn't some skill you consciously developed, it's been operational since you were a kid. You were the kid who just knew the adults were lying before they even finished their sentence. You simply process information differently. Carl Jung actually perfectly captures the unsettling precision of this intuitive mind. He says he does not see the stumbling block before his feet, but he smells a rat for 10 miles. You don't just pick up on obvious social cues. You sense the manipulation dressed up as generosity. You feel the raw power dynamics in the room that everyone else has silently agreed to ignore. Here is the crucial point. While most people are just evaluating the surface performance, you are immediately registering the resentment hiding right behind the smile. Your perception leaps past the entire social construction and lands on the raw truth instantaneously. And honestly, it happens without effort and often without your consent. You might just sit quietly in a boardroom, simply observing accurately, and watch the person across from you react with sudden, defensive hostility as though you just issued a public threat.
Part 3. The mask and exposure.
Look, society pretty much survives on a shared delusion, and your very existence just totally violates this agreement. Without your consent, I might add. Jung mapped out this concept called the persona. It's an individual's compromise with society, and it absolutely requires that nobody looks too closely at the distance between the mask and the actual face beneath it. You didn't choose to strip anyone's disguise. You just walked into the room with eyes that cannot stop functioning.
In the economy of the unconscious, your clarity is actually seen as an act of aggression. People can just feel when you see right through their mask, and they don't think you're perceptive, they unconsciously think you are dangerous. They don't have the vocabulary for what just happened, they just suddenly feel incredibly exposed in a space where everyone else agreed to play along. Your refusal to participate in the performance is registered as an offense.
And because society doesn't exactly allow direct confrontation for this invisible crime, the retaliation arrives in these deniable, low-grade punishments that make you feel totally paranoid. An unreturned phone call, a really subtle exclusion from a gathering, a sudden shift in body language, or just a strange, sourceless chill. You've probably spent your entire life trying to trace these hidden punishments back to something you said or did. But if you actually confront them about this chill, they will tell you that you're just imagining things. And for decades, you probably believe them.
Part 4. The Shadow Projected.
Here's the thing. People don't respond to being deeply seen with gratitude. They respond with a coordinated retaliation. It's what we call projection. When an average psyche cannot handle its own deep flaws, it has to throw them at someone else. And because your clarity already dismantled their mask, well, you become the perfect blank screen. The deeper shadow, the stuff that lives beneath our personal faults, is absolutely terrifying to confront. So unexamined people look at you, they see the reflection of their own unprocessed material, and they declare with complete certainty that the darkness is actually yours.
Just look at how this maps out. The disorienting vertigo you feel? It happens because you are literally being accused of the exact flaw that defines the person accusing you. The narcissist calls you self-absorbed. The liar constantly questions your honesty. It is an incredibly bewildering experience because the traits they're describing don't belong to you at all. They belong, with surgical precision, to the accuser.
As the saying goes, every charge they brought against you was autobiography written in the second person. I really want you to let that sink in for a second. You were taking their shadow home, trying it on the mirror, and examining it with a forensic devotion they never possessed. You listened to these accusations in genuine bewilderment. You lost sleep over labels that belonged to someone else, constantly asking yourself with brutal honesty if the charge was true.
You were out there examining fingerprints that were never even yours, at a crime scene that existed entirely inside the accuser's psyche. And honestly, the cruelest part of this whole dynamic is that your genuine integrity, your absolute willingness to self-reflect, is exactly what made you the perfect target for their unexamined panic. The person who would never examine themselves desperately needed someone who always does, and they found you. You were never the perpetrator. You were just the screen.
Part 5. The final verdict. We've reached the end of the investigation, so it's time to look at what this means for you moving forward. You cannot soften a mirror enough to make someone like their own reflection. All of your shrinking, accommodating, and edge sanding, it was never going to work because the problem you were trying to solve didn't live inside of you. You spent your entire adult life treating the resentment of others as a final verdict on your worth. But the strategy of editing yourself into something palatable was never, ever designed to work. You were pouring water into a hole that had no bottom, and somehow you blamed yourself for the hole.
You are not broken. You just represent the unconscious to people who are absolutely terrified of their own depths. You've probably lived with this false diagnosis for years, this idea that you're deeply flawed and constantly need to correct yourself. But the liberating truth is that your depth, your quiet capacity to see what is actually happening, these aren't personality traits to them. They are glaring reminders of everything they've buried. You are simply standing in the path of their avoidance.
So here is the final verdict. Not guilty. Not guilty of manipulation, not guilty of arrogance, not guilty of coldness, and definitely not guilty of being too much. What they called too much was really just the full measure of a person who hadn't yet learned to edit themselves down to a size the room could tolerate. The case against you returns a single verdict. Not guilty. You don't need to adjust your tone. You don't need to run one more autopsy on a conversation that went perfectly fine just because someone else couldn't handle your open eyes.
The investigation is officially finished. So will you finally close the case file on yourself and stop apologizing for your sight? You were never hated for what you did. You were hated because you refused to close your eyes. So what happens to your life when you finally close this file for good? The world asked you to edit yourself, and you became so incredibly fluent in self-erasure that you actually forgot what your original draft looked like. The only task that has ever actually belonged to you is to stop mistaking their panic for your verdict. Let the apology cease to form in your throat. Let the case file close.